The last thing you want to hear when you need your auto insurance most is a robot with countless irrelevant menu options. Which is why with USAA Auto Insurance, you'll get great service that is easy and reliable, all at the touch of a button. Get a quote today. Restrictions apply.
Buckeye Talk is about to begin. Hey, 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 come on in.
Welcome back to Buckeye Talk. I'm Stephen Means, and that's Stefan Krajisnik. As we continue with our State of the Program series, we wrapped up all the offense last week, and now it's defensive week. Now it's Matt Patricia's time to shine. Now it's time for a man who has not coached college football really ever, because he wasn't I don't think he was a full-time assistant when he was at Syracuse.
GA,
yeah, so this is his first time coaching college football in a full-time capacity, and Ryan Day's handed him the playbook and said, you see what Jim Knowles just spent the last 3 years doing? Do that, but with none of those players because they are currently employed by the National Football League. Good luck, because if you don't, going to be upset. Good luck with that.
Yeah, certainly an interesting situation to walk into as someone who hasn't coached college football, but it seems like the players gravitate towards him. Seem the players like him a lot, and that's at least promising, if nothing else, from some of the rumors that swirled about Patricia at the end of his NFL career.
He is doing exceptionally well, and you and I have talked about this away from microphones. Of like, yeah, man, maybe we're going to be wrong about Matt Patricia, and then you always go, well, let's see what happens on the Saturdays in the fall, because all this is great, but if you are not good at calling the plays, then none of this really matters. And so he's at least checked, in my opinion, square one of, is this going to work? And that's the offseason with how he's embedded himself in the program, but also he seems to be playing at least a decent role on the recruiting trail, especially with the defensive line. I know Ohio State's gotten a couple of commits there already, and it seems like Matt Patricia's played a role there. And that segues us into the defensive line, where we have our longest tenured coach on the roster, and that's Larry Johnson, who is back once again. He got asked before the spring, hey, Larry, how long are you going to do this? He said, until God tells me to stop. So I guess we should stop asking Larry Johnson when he's going to retire, because he's just going to do it when he does it, Stefan. But this is maybe the biggest reset we've seen from the defensive line, maybe in the Ryan Day era, especially the Ryan Day era, where that defensive line room has had some faces of it since 2021, and now all those guys are gone. This is essentially, has Larry Johnson been preparing the guys behind Jack Sawyer, JT Tuimoloau, Tyleik Williams, and Ty Hamilton to be ready to play football in 2025?
It's maybe the biggest question of this team going into the 2025 season. I think there's obviously a lot of changes and a lot of areas to point to, but I think the production that you get from this defensive line and kind of the step forward that these guys take is maybe the biggest thing that, like, if you read between the lines of what Ryan Day is talking about sometimes, it's very often, hey, we've got a lot of guys who have been around Ohio State, but even those guys who played a decent amount of snaps last year aren't getting asked to, or are getting asked to take kind of a bigger role, a bigger step forward. A lot of the times I don't think he's talking about the Jermaine Matthews of the world. A lot of the times I think he's talking about this defensive line and guys like Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson, two guys that you and I both believe can be all Big Ten, first team caliber defensive ends. Okay, yeah, but that's from signs that we've seen as backups in smaller roles. Mm-hmm. What does it look like when you got to play 40, 50 snaps against Texas? The same goes for Eddrick Houston and Caden McDonald. So I think this is maybe, funny enough, I did a radio hit shortly before you and I got here to record the pod, and they asked me what's kind of the one area that you could pinpoint that might leave some questions to be answered for Ohio State. And I said defensive line and mainly defensive tackle, but the defensive line as a whole, it's an interesting group and definitely a pod that I've been excited to record because I think there's a lot to unpack here with what goes on in Larry Johnson's room.
Okay, so let's start with Kenyatta and Caden. So Kenyatta Jackson has played 514 career snaps at Ohio State. He has 29 total pressures in his career. He has 25 tackles, 6 TFLs, and 3 sacks, a pass breakup, and a fumble recovery over the last 3 seasons. Kenyatta Jackson also, we talk as much about Jeremiah Smith and that South Florida pipeline that Ohio State has built to Chaminade Madonna. Kenyatta Jackson was here before JJ was, and he's also from that school. Caden Curry, 77, career snaps. He's got 27 pressures in his career. He also has 45 tackles, 10 tackles for loss, 4.5 sacks, and a pass breakup, and he's forced 2 fumbles. He actually had a pretty decent 2024, 22 tackles, 4 TFLs, and forced 2.5 sacks, and the 2 forced fumbles. Do we think they're ready for this? I think there's 2 ways you can look at this. There's Kenyatta Jackson was a top 100 recruit in the 2022 recruiting class. Caden Curry was a top 150, top 175 recruit in the 2022 recruiting class. And neither one of them has played over 600 snaps in their career. Why? And well, the answer is because JT Choimaloa was a 5-star recruit turned 2nd-round draft pick. Jack Sawyer was a 5-star recruit turned into, I think it was a 4th-round draft pick, but also a very productive player in his career here. It's very easy to go, the reason they didn't play is because they were blocked. But the other way to look at that is the reason they didn't play is because they didn't force Larry Johnson to feel like they could play alongside Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau and more than just a secondary role. Because if Larry Johnson felt like he had 4, they all would have played around the same number of snaps. And yet we've seen games, whether it's the Notre Dame game in 2023 or the Michigan game the last 2 years, where Jack and JT just don't come off the field. So I am on alert for Jack and JT were just that good. So Caden and Kenyatta didn't play. But I'm also not going to get to the middle of the season. And if Caden and Kenyatta are fine, we're going to go, oh, that's the reason why they didn't play more when Jack and JT were.
Yeah, I guess somewhere in between is probably the right answer. Somewhere a mixture of Jack and JT were that good, but also maybe these guys weren't quite ready. And, that's why this offseason is so important. I think I didn't have a lot of questions about Kenyatta and Caden going into the offseason. I thought that they were both kind of, ready to take that next step. I don't want to say like this created some concern. It definitely did raise some eyebrows when Ohio State brought in Bo Atkinson. Yeah. And it made me wonder, like, yes, if a player of that caliber is available, you go out and get him. But also maybe it tells us a little bit about Caden or Kenyatta and their, maybe worry that they're not quite there yet. So, it's a big unknown. And I think that might kind of be the theme of this pod that we talk about is like, there's some guys who just have to answer questions. And once we get a few games into the season, we'll have those answers. So I lean toward there probably being some middle ground of like, we have to acknowledge how good Jack and JT were, but at the same time, maybe something was a little bit behind in the development of these 2 players to where they weren't ready to quite have massive impacts in 2024 season. Although I will say Caden, some of my confidence in Caden did come from the fact that he played a big role in special teams and was great there. So Ohio State obviously trusted him and he proved that he can kind of be a leader and an energy guy in that phase of the game. And once he got an opportunity at defensive end, that he was going to take advantage of it. So I lean toward confidence, but at the same time acknowledge that I understand where questions could come from.
I just don't want to get through. And the problem is they play Texas week 1, so we're going to know the answer to this question immediately. I don't want to get to a point here where Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry were good when you were asking them to play 20 to 25 snaps. But now you start asking them to play 40 to 45 snaps, and now all of a sudden it's not sustained, right? It's very flash in the pan. Kenyatta Jackson, the most snaps he played in a game this past season, he played 32 against Marshall. They worked him in the playoff a little bit more because he only played 7 against Michigan, but against Tennessee 23, Oregon 22, Texas 18, Notre Dame 15, and then Caden Curry, the most snaps he played 35 against Purdue. He played 3 against Michigan, 17 against Tennessee, 10 against Oregon, 8 against Texas, and 6 against Notre Dame. And as you mentioned, he also had a role on special teams. The only 2 games he played more than 20 snaps were Purdue and Northwestern, which were essentially let's play the young guys and get out of the healthy games. So I just, maybe I have more confidence in Kenyatta than I do Caden right now, because Caden feels more like Caden Curry is out there every time he makes a play. Okay, but is it easier to make a play when you get rotated in the middle of the second quarter and the offensive line has already been out there for 40 snaps? And so now you got a fresh Caden Curry against a tackle who maybe has been working against JT and Jack all day, and now you throw a fresh body at him? While with Kenyatta Jackson, I thought he made play, especially in the Tennessee game. They called him for a roughing the passer on an interception by, I think it was Davis and Igbedosin, which I thought was questionable to begin with. But it's you understand what I'm saying, though, right? It's cool to do what they did when you're going up against a tired unit versus you're out there from snap 1. You are now the guy you are going to be relied on. And I think that's just going to be the theme of this pod with some of these guys who are finally getting their chance is finally these guys are getting their chance. And we're going to go, hey, Larry, why are you just not playing these guys? Or we're going, oh, they finally got their chance and it's not great. So what's their floor for you this year?
And the floor, I think, is kind of low. because this could bottom out and these guys aren't ready, and all of a sudden you're not really feeling great about your depth either. So I say bottom out, like that's probably pretty harsh, but like an average Big Ten defensive line, I think is probably this team's floor. And after seeing what that unit did last year, we'll get into it later, but like, is average Big Ten defensive line enough to win you a national title?
It's going to be interesting to see how we talk about the linebackers, because I do think there is a world that exists this year where the defensive line is not the engine behind the defense the way we've known it to be for Ohio State. And that's not to say that Trent's play is going to be bad. It's just whether you're talking the Bosa brothers, Tyquan Lewis, Chase Young, or even what Jack and JT and Tyleek and Ty turned into during that playoff run, maybe that's not how this team gets it done this year. And if that's true, because if you're doing it out of a place of strength of another position, I think I'm fine with it. If we get to a point where it's like you're asking Arvell Reese and Sonny Styles and Peyton Pierce to do X, Y, and Z because you're not getting it. What we don't need is the Oregon game, not the second one, the first game against Texas, where it's like, oh my God, there were all these problems. But then you rewatch the game, it's like, oh, the reason they had all these problems is because Arch Manning was just back there chilling the entire game and there was no pressure there. Okay. Which moves into CJ Hicks.
Do you think, you think that's right, though, on the floor? Like average Big Ten maybe being the floor?
Super low floor, but I also think potentially super high ceiling, and that's scary. That's scary because where do you fall?
That's the theme of this whole unit.
Right, because it's not, they're not, if they're an average defensive line unit, then we got some other issues. That means there were some misevaluations and some terrible development for 4 years here. So I do agree. Their floor is, they are, if we rank the top 8, 10 defensive lines in the Big Ten of the 18 teams, they are closer to 10 than they are, and maybe even trying their hardest to stay on the list at 10. Now, that's a bit of a hyperbole because the Big Ten, not everywhere has got good defensive lines, but you don't mention them in that tier 1 group with the Big Ten defensive lines. That's essentially what we're saying. The ceiling is Kenyatta Jackson has been waiting to do this for 4 years, and now he's a second-round NFL draft pick. He's got 8 sacks. Caden Curry's like, I could have been doing this for 4 years. They just didn't play me. And he's got 6.5 sacks. Bo Atkinson gets involved here. But with those two specifically, I think one of them needs to be one of the 10 best defensive ends in the Big Ten. And that's not asking a lot. I don't think that's asking a lot.
And I will say, as much as they kind of been behind the scenes, I think with Caden especially, we know that there have been other schools that have tried to get him in the portal and offered decent amount of money. So a third party observer from another school obviously thinks Caden's pretty good. So that's got to be something, I think.
I mean, you can say the same thing about Kenyatta Jackson.
Right.
There's been this idea of like, man, when's he going to head out the door? When's the Florida kid going to head back to Florida? And he never did that. It's just this 2022 recruiting class has felt like the depth class to the 2021 class, the superstar class. And now the depth class has to be the superstars. And are they ready to do that? Which moves us into the CJ Hicks conversation of hit 22 tackles, 2 TFLs, and 2 sacks last year in a pass breakup. In his career, he has 36 tackles, 3 TFLs, 2 sacks, and a pass breakup. And he's played 226 snaps, and he has 7 total pressures. Obviously, all that came as a linebacker. He is now a defensive line. I don't know, Stefan, we were out at the camps. You and I were doing different stuff at the camps. Andrew's out there at those recruiting camps in June to pay attention to the high schoolers who are trying to earn offers. You and I are out there to get intel, talk to the coaches, talk to people in the program, but also just kind of see the players who are walking around. I know we talked about, Eddrick Houston said he's 295 now, and we both looked at him and was like, yeah, he's ready. He's ready to be who he's supposed to be. And we'll get into the defensive tackle talk in the next segment. But I don't know if you saw it, but I think it was the third camp. So it was Monday. No, that would have been the second camp then. So it was that Monday where the entire defensive line was over there in the sand doing drills and whatnot while the camp was going on. And first and foremost, Bo Atkinson is a large human being, especially up top. Like his shoulders are massive. And it was cool to see Kenyatta Jackson, because the coaches can't be involved in that stuff right now. So Kenyatta Jackson's like leading this group of stuff. But CJ Hicks still doesn't look like a Big Ten defensive end. But he's not a Big Ten prototypical defensive end. He is, I think, for us, the guinea pig for what we think the defensive line, what the front might look like, and some of the stuff that Matt Patricia might do. But we do know he has the ability to get up the passer. He is more in the mold of Von Miller, Micah Parsons, Abdul Corey. That's not saying he's as good as those guys, but the types of outside standing rushers who are out there to get after the passer more than anything else. 5-star recruit. He's now in year 4, though, so that recruiting ranking means nothing. What's best case scenario for what CJ Hicks turns into this year?
Best case scenario is probably a guy that gets you, 5+ sacks. maybe gets close to that 10 sack range. I think that's so much of what we talked about last year is this guy should be getting after the quarterback. He should be on the edge getting after the quarterback. And we finally see him in that role. And best case scenario, if it all clicks, is a guy who's doing just that, who's getting you 5 to 10 sacks. I mean, I guess if you want to get hyperbolic and say, but I'm kind of saying best case scenario while mixing in some reality. I think if you want to get hyperbolic, I think he can be a guy who has 10 plus sacks and maybe that 5-star talent clicks and he's a first round pick or something along those lines. But if I'm going to be more realistic with kind of what best case scenario is, I think you can expect him to get 5 to 10. Like he can get numbers comparable to what you would get from a really good defensive end. Right. What did Jack finish with last year? Like 12 sacks?
JT had 12 and a half and Jack had 9.
Okay. So, yeah, Jack had 9. I mean, if CJ's in that 5 to 10 range, I think you're feeling pretty good about what you got from him. So I think that's best case. There's obviously a lot of questions that have to be answered there, but as ceiling, if it all hits, he's a guy who, on third down, quarterbacks are dreading having to face him.
So I'm looking at cfpstats.com, which I hate the way they do these things because they only go back for so far, but it's fine. Going back to 2016, here are the 10 sack guys per year. I don't know if you've heard of this guy, but TJ Watt at Wisconsin had 11 and a half sacks. Afide Edigbo at Northwestern had 10 sacks. I hope I'm saying that wrong. If I'm not, I apologize. Taco Charlton, Columbus kid, had 10 sacks at Michigan. That's 2016. 2017, no sack guy, 10 sack guys. Joe Gaziano at Northwestern had 9, and Nick Bosa had 8.5. And the thing is, Nick Bosa could have been a 10 sack guy here. It's just they were rotating. It's 5 guys here, so he only gets 8.5. Nick would have definitely had 10 sacks in 2018 because that's his money year and he gets hurt. Chase had 10 sacks that year, and AJ and Panessa at Iowa had 10.5 sacks. Anthony Nelson at Iowa also had 9.5 sacks. So Iowa, man, 2 defensive ends who were getting after it. 2019, Chase Young has 16.5 sacks. Zach Bond at Wisconsin had 12.5. Chris Orr at Wisconsin had 11.5. AJ Impanenza had 11.5. And Kenny Willekes had 10.5 sacks. 2020, no 10 sack guys because the Big Ten only played 8 games. But Micah McFadden at Indiana had 6. So I guess if you prorate that to a normal year, maybe he starts flirting with 10 sacks. 2021, Aiden Hutchinson has 14 sacks, and David Ojabo has 11 sacks. The 2 Michigan guys are the only people in the country with 10 sacks. Nick Herbig at Wisconsin is the only guy in 2022 with 10 sacks. He has 11. In 2023, Nick Skirton at Purdue had 10 sacks. He's the only 10 sack guy in the country. And then last year, JT led the Big Ten with 12.5 sacks. And that's because he went bananas in the postseason. I don't even think he was flirting with 10 sacks when he got to the postseason. He just kind of went bananas. Abdul Carter with 12. Teo Uiagalelei at Oregon, who's probably the best defensive end returning in the Big Ten this year, had 10.5. He was actually leading the Big Ten when the postseason started. And then Michael Kamara at Indiana had 10. And then Denai Dennis, I'm just throwing him in here because him and Mateo are probably the best too. He had 8.5 sacks. And then Jack had 9. I think that the reason I read that off is 10 sacks is hard in the Big Ten. I think best case scenarios, the only reason CJ Hicks is not a first round draft pick in the 2026 NFL draft is because he only did it for 1 year. And it's not a big enough sample size for somebody to pop him. But he's like the 47th pick in the NFL draft because he has 10 sacks next year. Or maybe he has 12 sacks. And it's essentially just, it's 3rd and 7. And he is the reason why Big Ten offenses can't push the ball down the field because he's wrecking things. He is finally playing the position he was always meant to play. Matt Patricia's his defensive coordinator, and so he's moving him all over the place, and it's just boom, on 3rd and 7, he's making a lot. Worst case scenario is that's all he can do, so you can't play him, which is why Bo Atkinson is here. Because as great as that is to have a guy who can get after the passer like that, they got to stop the run. And if CJ, who, again, he physically doesn't look like the other defensive ends because the other defensive ends look like edge-setting, run-stopping defensive ends. And he looks like a speed rusher. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's 2 different styles of edge rusher. So what happens when he plays Michigan? Can you play him 35 snaps against Michigan if Michigan's going to try to run the ball as much as they do? I think he becomes a guy where in the playoff he becomes valuable because now you're playing against teams who feel like they have tackles who can line up with Ohio State, so they're more likely to leave him one-on-one on an island like that. But during the regular season schedule, when this is still the Big Ten, teams like to run the ball, is Illinois just going to try to run the ball at 11 every time he's on the field? Is Penn State just going to try to run the ball at 11 every time he's on the field? So I think his best and worst case scenario are the same. Best case scenario, he's so good of a pass rusher that he is a problem. Worst case scenario, he's so good of a pass rusher, but he sucks at everything else, so you can't play him. I think realistically, he has like 5 sacks, probably.
I think that's
And he's a good
year.
football
I think
player.
anything between 5 to 10 is good.
Yeah. But I just think, and if Jim Knowles were still here, maybe I wouldn't think that so much, because then we'd be like, oh, are they going to play the jack? No, they're not going to play the jack. I don't remember the last time Matt Patricia ran a defense that wasn't like a 3-down front with a rushing outside linebacker. So that's a guy who has, at the highest possible level, ran the type of defense that I think CJ Hicks probably fits best in. But we don't think, it's interesting. I think we both are like, who has a higher ceiling, lower floor? Kenyatta Jackson and Caden Curry, or CJ Hicks, in terms of what they could be, but what you're scared they might.
Yeah, I mean, CJ might have the highest ceiling out of all of them.
But does he also have the lowest floor?
I think definitely. I think you summarized it pretty well of just like, this is what CJ can do. Can he do it in like a quarter of the snaps though? If that's what it is. If you can only put him out there on 3rd and 5+, how often does he see the field then? We have to see how much of a well-rounded player he's become this offseason. It's been pretty obvious that he's worked very closely with Matt Patricia and has a great relationship with Matt Patricia.
Yeah.
So there's obviously something there. But it's when you put it on the field, who knows? I think the CJ Hicks experiment for me, I think really begins week 2. I just don't know how much with Arch and what that Texas offense can do in terms of the rushing attack, how much you trot him out there in week 1, right? Maybe we see him get a sack and he plays on a 3rd and 7 and gets after Arch. But I think week 2 is when they start going, okay, we can take some shots here and see what CJ's made out of. Because we even saw, granted he was kind of playing linebacker, but we could tell pretty early it might have been the Akron game where we were just like, CJ's not looking good in coverage right now. You can kind of see it early in the year against lesser opponents. And we immediately were kind of like, this guy might not see a ton of playing time this year. And maybe the Texas game isn't when we get some of those answers, but I think week 2 is when we can start getting some answers on how much has CJ kind of become a more well-rounded player, even as a defensive end now, to kind of determine how much will we see him when Penn State comes to town. It would be a pretty great story if he was a guy who blew up the Penn State game and Jim Knowles is kind of watching it being like, yeah, you guys were right.
I've been wanting to do this for 4 years and you didn't let me do it. I really wish they weren't playing Texas week 1 because you're right. So do you think he plays more than 10 snaps against Texas?
No, I think Bo Atkinson gets more snaps against Texas than CJ Hicks.
So how good is Bo Atkinson going to be this year?
I think he's going to be pretty good. And I think he's going to get a decent opportunity because I think he's going to be the guy that gets more snaps. And maybe CJ Hicks gets more sacks. But I think Bo is going to have some good PFF grades. He's going to be pretty good in the rushing attack and probably get after the quarterback a little bit as well. So I think I would say Bo probably ends up being kind of your number 3 defensive end, where CJ's kind of a little bit of this wild card that can really get after the quarterback.
He had 25 pressures last year. He also had 35 tackles, 12 TFLs, and 7.5 sacks. Do you think he has 10 sacks? Do you think he had 2.5 more sacks at that point at Ohio State?
I lean towards no. Games played obviously is going to factor into that. I lean towards no, though, just because of, I guess, the 3 other guys in that room who are going to get snaps as well.
So I want to use last year's batch of transfers to talk about Bo, because I almost feel like there's a scale for the 8 guys they brought in last year. There's Keenan Nelson Jr., the South Carolina safety transfer, who didn't play a single snap. I'm not including Julian Sand in this group, actually, because he's a true freshman. I mean, he's a transfer by proxy. He's a different type of transfer. Like, he got to a college and immediately his coach retired. That's a very different thing. His time at Alabama does not exist outside of a website and a fun trivia question at a family game night. So Keenan Nelson Jr. is the lowest of the both. That's like no impact whatsoever. You got Will Kazmarek, who is a co-starter. Decent impact. And then you start moving up. I think Will Howard's next on the scale. He's your starting quarterback. He was a good football player for you, but I wouldn't necessarily say he was the engine behind Ohio State's offense. He was a veteran quarterback who was driving the car, but his job was to manage the game more than it was to be a playmaker. Now, did he end up making some plays along the way? Yes, he did. But if we're ranking these transfers last year, I think he's right above Will Kazmarek. And here's why. Because Seth McLaughlin was an All-American and the best center in the country. So he's next on that scale for me. After that is Quinshawn Judkins. He was probably one of their 7 best players last year. Well, I don't know. They had some really good football players. He was definitely one of their 6 best offensive players. And he was everything that you thought he was going to be. He was one of the best running backs in the country. He was just sharing the load with someone. And then Caleb Downs at the top of that. He's the best defensive player in the country. So if it's Caleb 1, Quinshawn 2, Seth McLaughlin 3, Will Howard 4, Will Kazmarek 5, and Keenan Nelson 6. If you slide Bo Atkinson in terms of what his impact for Ohio State in 2025 will be, where would he rank amongst last year's transfers?
I'd probably put him like right below Will Howard.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, okay, do you think he's going to be one of the best defensive ends in the country? Because Seth McLaughlin was the best center in the country.
No, I agree there. It's more like you're putting him behind Will Howard. I mean, it's not a crazy thing to say.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also factoring Will's impact in the locker room.
Fair. I don't know. Like, Bo Atkinson was very good at North Carolina. And I do feel like he might get more one-on-one opportunities with Ohio State.
See that?
I think Will Howard's locker room impact, if you're saying that's the tiebreaker between him and Bo Atkinson, you can't argue that. Bo Atkinson is a defensive end. He can't have the same locker room impact that Will Howard as a quarterback who's 23 years old had there. But is that, so I guess if you're saying he would be 6th on that list essentially, I think, if my math's right. Caleb Downs, Quinshawn Judkins, Seth McLaughlin, Will Howard. No, he'd be 5th. Yeah. Is that a successful transfer?
I think so. Because there's part of him that like made me think of Quinshawn in the sense of like workload division. Yeah. Because I think he's going to come in and share a pretty decent amount with, Kenyatta and Caden, and we'll see how much CJ Hicks factors into it. But like that's what's tough. Like Seth McLaughlin, Caleb Downs, Will Howard, like they came and were starters. Like their job, they're not coming off the field, barring injuries. And the opposite, I think, applies to the Quinshawns and the Bo Atkinsons of the world of like, you're coming in, you're an awesome player, you're going to have to divide the work a little bit. So like, I guess like relative to workload, he could probably be, up there pretty high in terms of transfer rankings. But, so you said, what do you had, 7.5 sacks last year?
Yeah.
How many guys on the team can have 5+ sacks this year?
Yeah.
Like we so his numbers might dip and he might be just as valuable and just as good of a player. But like, I think there's more competition too in terms of seeing the field. So I think you're right. He maybe gets some more one-on-one opportunities this year because Kenyatta Jackson is opposite of him or whatever the case may be. But at the same time, there's also Caden Curry who's going to play. And Kenyatta Jackson who's got to play. And that's what maybe I struggle with. Like if he gets 5 sacks, I think that's a pretty good year for him. And I think there's going to be, the way that Alabama fans did it with Caleb Downs, it's like, oh, his numbers aren't as good. It's like, I mean, yeah, but like watch the game. And there might be some North Carolina fans who are like, oh, he has 3 fewer sacks this year. That's not good. It's like, yeah, but watch the game. You'll understand.
There were 4 guys with 6 sacks. Sonny Styles had 6, Cody Simon had 7, Jack Sawyer had 9, and JT had 12.5. Do you think there's 4 guys with at least 6 sacks in 2025?
If I'm allowed to count the linebackers, yeah.
Okay, we'll save that part for linebackers then.
Yeah.
Because I agree with that. I just don't know how many.
That's part of it too. It's like I can't come out here and say Kenyatta, Caden, Bo are each going to have 5+ sacks, and then, oh, by the way, tomorrow we're going to get on here and say, well, Arvo Reese and Sonny Styles are going to have 10+ sacks.
Yeah. 4 guys had 6+ sacks. Half of them were defensive linemen. The other half were linebackers. That's a good point. Okay.
After starting this pod by being like defensive line might be the biggest question. Here's how everyone is going to get 5+ sacks.
Everybody's going to set records, even though we're questioning them. Okay. Let's take a break. That's the edge. This one's just naturally going to be longer because it's more people to talk about and there's more question marks. We started with the edge. We're going to take a quick break here and then come back and move into the interior where I don't think there's questions anymore. And in terms of who it's going to be, it's are you going to do it or not situation? And we'll get into that when we come back from the break here.
The Abercrombie Kids Summer Sale is in full swing with up to 50% off select styles for the season. Summer plans, vacation, and camp days are all covered with new dresses, shorts, tees, and swim. Abercrombie Kids has the summer staples they need and the looks that they want to wear. Shop in-store, online, or in the app. Offer applies to select styles as indicated. Discount applied at checkout online.
Here at the Almond Joy Factory, where tropical vibes abound, we use soft, fresh-tasting coconut.
The crunchiest almonds and delicious chocolate candy.
Ah, but do you know what our most important ingredient is? Sometimes you feel like a nut.
Sometimes you don't.
Almond Joy's got nuts and something even way better than that. Yes, Almond Joy is made with almonds and joy.
And we're back here on Buckeye Talk, Stephen Means and Stefan Krajisnik. It's our State of the Program series, our State of the Room series. Today is the defensive line to kick off defensive week. Just talking about all the toys that Matt Patricia has to play with, and that starts up front with Larry Johnson and this defensive line. On the interior, let's start positive. When I sent this structure to Stefan, I essentially had the same phrase for Ohio State's 2 projected starting defensive tackles. And the first one is, Eddrick Houston will be blank and why, Stefan?
So this morning I woke up and I was thinking about the defensive line, and I tweeted something about Eddrick Houston. And I kid you not, like an hour later, I was scrolling through some of the subtext that we had sent out this week because I hadn't seen them all. There's been 614-350-3315. The recruiting camps have had some awesome texts from Andrew specifically, but Steven and I being there as well. Steven had like texted almost word for word the same thing that like 2 days later I thought to tweet. And it's about Eddrick Houston and how he's kind of poised for a breakout year. So the fill in the blank, Eddrick Houston will be a major breakout candidate for Ohio State this season. And the reason why is the position change showed how good he can be. This offseason showed how ready he is to be a defensive tackle at Ohio State. The dude looks massive, and he looks ready to go. Like we said 295. I was trying to look back. I think last year he was listed at 270, if I'm not mistaken. But I don't know if that was updated in the spring or if that was from August of last year. So maybe the growth has been even more than going from 270 to 295. But regardless, like he's one of the offseason winners. Austin Saraville, by the way, another guy. When we recorded the offensive line. You're doing offensive line with Andrew. Make sure to mention Austin Saraville and how he's looked at these camps because he's looked outstanding. He looks ready to go too.
He looks like he's going to be all first team Big Ten.
Yeah. And Eddrick looks that part too. And like Eddrick is a very like athletic 295. Like he's a guy who looks like he's going to get after the quarterback as a defensive tackle, but also be a big factor in the running game. He looks like a guy poised for breakout season.
Eddrick Houston will be the best defensive tackle in the Big Ten. I thought last year he looked like a defensive end pretending to be a defensive tackle, which he started playing the position in the middle of the season and got his first start against Purdue. He looks like a defensive tackle now. He looks like the type of guy where Georgia's going to be going, I cannot believe we let that kid leave Georgia. I cannot believe we let that kid go to Ohio. He's going to be the best defensive tackle in the Big Ten. He's the one person that I think we haven't really hyped up as much because we've been so focused on Arvell Reese and what he might be able to be, and Jeremiah Smith exists and Caleb Downs exists, that I think Eddrick Houston has been able to fly under the radar as a guy who's on schedule. As an early enrollee 5-star recruit, he pushed to get on the field in a small way. And he played legit snaps in the postseason for Ohio State. Like he was a part of their rotation. And now it's year 2. The 2 guys who were in front of him are gone, and they need him to be the best version of himself for what he'll be as a second-year guy here. I'm willing to go out on this ledge. I'm thinking about people I might drive the bus for this year. I'm thinking about Eddrick Houston, like a lot. And the idea of, what if he's Draymond Jones good? Draymond Jones had like 8 sacks in 2018. What if he's that good? What if it's, we're talking about defensive ends and getting sacks. Oh, Kenyatta Jackson had 7 sacks this year, but 4 of them were because Eddrick Houston blew up the pocket. The quarterback tried to run, and Kenyatta Jackson said, come give me a hug, brother. I'll take care of you on the ground. And Kenyatta Jackson got the sack. But if you watch the game, it's because Eddrick Houston said, hey, Arch, you can't stand here. There is no pocket anymore. They need to create the sacks responsible for. I don't know how many sacks Eddrick Houston is going to have. The defensive tackles and sacks, unless your name is Aaron Donald or something, isn't always a thing. But I think he might be responsible for like 12 sacks this year. And it's simply just because no pocket for you, quarterback. CJ Hicks, come give me a hug. Arvell Reese, come give me a hug. And we're going, Eddrick Houston made that happen. Eddrick Houston will be the best defensive tackle, the best 3-tech in the Big Ten in 2025.
Yeah, I think we're both pretty high on what he can be. I think he's one of those, I guess, maybe a sleeper pick right now, but won't be after the 2025 season in terms of like 2027 NFL draft. This guy's going to go pretty early.
Yeah. I mean, some of this is going to depend on San and what he turns into, right? Because quarterbacks go early. Mm-hmm. But I think you might be able to make a case that the way things are projecting right now, if he's a 3-and-done player, and he is what I think he is, I don't think it's crazy to say maybe he's the second Buckeye off the board in 2027 because we know who the first Buckeye off the board is going to be.
Right.
It's number 4. And again, some of this depends on what Sam turns into because that's, I think, the only way that Jeremiah Smith's not the first Buckeye that comes off the board is if Julian Sam turns himself into a quarterback that's the number 1 pick in the NFL draft. But I'm really high on Eddrick. Okay, Caden McDonald will be blank and why?
I said the face of consistency. I think he's going to be exactly what you need up front. A guy who's probably not going to be, the numbers aren't going to be flashy. The plays aren't going to be flashy, but it's like if you watch the game, if you talk to Larry Johnson, if you talk to Matt Patricia, like this guy is the engine to this defense. I think Tyleik Williams did that a ton last year. I think Ty Hamilton did that a ton last year where there's a lot of dirty work that's being done that you probably don't notice because they're not collecting sacks or a ton of tackles for loss or anything like that. But like Caden McDonald was a driving force in Ohio State's goal line stop against Penn State last year. And it's easy to miss it if you're not watching back or you're not watching closely on the interior of the line. So I think Caden McDonald is going to be one of those guys where every Monday when we have our Leave No Doubt pod and we're rewatching the game, Steve and I are going to be like, hey, by the way, we didn't mention Caden McDonald on Saturday night. We probably should have because he's the reason that Texas only ran for 70 yards or something like that. So especially for a unit where we have questions about the depth and we kind of have some questions about the rush defense in general because Caden and Kenyatta, we're talking about them as like defensive ends and pass rushers. We think they can be pretty good in terms of stopping the run, but you're losing 2 elite edge guys in terms of stopping the run. I think Jack and JT were about as good as they get in doing that. So this defensive line as a whole, I think we got some questions about the rush defense. Caden McDonald might be the answer to a lot of those. So I went with face of consistency because I think every week we know what Caden McDonald is going to produce. And it might not be flashy, but it's going to be enough to give Ohio State a chance to win any game.
You know who we didn't talk about enough? Ty Hamilton. He's a top 150 pick. 5th round, 148 to the Rams. Last year, Ty Hamilton played 669 snaps. He had 19 pressures. He was also, of the next group of, the 4 guys who had 6 or more, Ty Hamilton had 3.5 sacks last year. He had more sacks than Tyleik Williams had last year. 51 tackles, 6 TFLs, a fumble recovery, a forced fumble, and 3.5 sacks last year. He was the epitome of what you are talking about with Caden McDonald in terms of consistency. But when you're a nose, you just don't get the press clippings. Because you do a thankless job you do the dirty work and you don't get necessarily the thanks for it. So mine is Caden McDonald will be a more appreciated Ty Hamilton. Because you mentioned it, the Penn State play, Tyleik Williams has to come out of the game. How many people off the top of their head can mention that one of the reasons why Ohio State got the goal line stand is because Caden McDonald made a play and blew up a hole before Penn State had a chance to take advantage of it and probably would have scored in that situation. So I do think we didn't appreciate Ty Hamilton enough. And so I'm glad to see the NFL appreciated him. Top 150 pick for a guy who does a thankless job. It's not that far.
After Pro Day, we started being like, I know who's going to appreciate Ty Hamilton, the NFL.
Yeah, because man, oh man, Ty Hamilton. I mean, he went 25 picks after Jack Sawyer.
I remember when we were doing the pre-draft pod and you were like, sometimes we forget Ohio State can't have this many top 150 guys. And we were like, yeah, true. But we have to, Hamilton's got to be one of them.
Yeah, they can't have that many top one. They have 14 picks. All but 3 of them were in the top 150. So yes, they can. They can have that many top 150 picks, Steven. So think about that. Next April, we're doing it again. They can have this many top 150 picks. And I think the cool thing about Ty Hamilton's career was he didn't come in here as a true nose. He was more of a defensive end who was 260 and a 3-star recruit. I remember the day he committed because I was in Vegas at the time he committed, which is its own story. But I was in Vegas the day he committed to Ohio State in the summer of 2019. Worked his way into the rotation, and there was always this idea of, hey, he's on the same trajectory as his brother Devon, as a guy who it might take some time for him to develop, but once he develops, he's going to be a prominent player. 25 snaps in 2020, 255 snaps in 2021, 305 snaps in 22, 350 snaps in 23, and then 669 this past year. He had 59 total pressures in his career. We just never really appreciated a guy who does a thankless job. So Caden McDonald for me will be a more appreciated Ty Hamilton because I do think that's something we're going to be paying attention to a lot more this year, especially when you feel like the depth at defensive tackle right now isn't maybe where it should be. And so your eyes and your attention are going to be on the top 2 guys a lot more often. If I'm sitting here saying Eddrick Houston might be the best defensive tackle in the Big Ten, and Caden McDonald might be a really awesome guy that an NFL team might take with the 101st pick in the NFL draft. Scale of 1 to 10. Well, no, I said 0 to 10. 0 being you're not concerned at all about defensive tackle depth. 10 being sound the alarm. Ohio State might not be able to stop the run in 2025. With a group that features Tywan Malone, Jason Moore, Will Smith Jr. as the guys that I think those guys are going to this year. And then right after them is where Eric Mensah, Dominic Kirks, and then your true freshmen, Maxwell Roy, Trajan Odom, and Jarquez Carter. We're maybe not expecting the 3 freshmen to play. Maybe Mensah and Dominic Kirks have had a type of summer where they've gotten to this. But bare minimum, I think we're expecting Malone, Moore, and Smith to be essentially what Eddrick Houston and Caden McDonald were last year as the second unit guys. 0 to 10, what's your level of concern, Stefan?
Probably like 6.5. And a lot of that, I think, is based off the fact that I have a lot of confidence in Caden McDonald and Eddrick Houston taking the next step as starters. And as good as they were at backups last year, I think we point to last year and say, yeah, but Tyleik and Ty were pretty damn good. And that can help carry you a long way. But even then, there's still some concern. It's just like football games are long, man. There's a lot of snaps to be played. And when you're, 290, 300 pounds, let me see what Caden is listed at. I know Eddrick, we just said, is 295. Caden McDonald's listed at 326 on the spring roster. Like, that's a lot of snaps at that size to be playing if you don't have trust right now in the guys behind them. And it's hard to come on here and say, I think Caden McDonald and Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson and Eddrick Houston, all these guys are going to take their next step in their development and be dudes as starters. And also at the same time tell you that all these backups are going to take steps and be good backups. Like, at some point you have to take into account that someone's development isn't going to go right along the way. That happens sometimes. Some dudes just don't develop. You can't say that all 8 guys on the defensive line are going to develop as you expect them to. And if there's 4 guys, 5 guys that, I'm saying they're stepping up as starters, then there's some guys behind that aren't going to be as great. And that's where my concern comes from is, you also wrote on here, like, do we think that could cost Ohio State? Like, yeah, defensive tackle depth could be the difference between beating or losing to Michigan. I think we saw, I want to make it very clear. I do not blame the defense at all for what happened in Ohio State's loss against Michigan last November.
No.
But there was a time in that fourth quarter where that drive for Michigan kept going and going and going and going. And you're thinking to yourself, like, man, Jack's playing his heart out in this game. Sure would have been nice if in the second quarter he could have got some time to catch his breath. And I think it ultimately was part of why they lost that game. So you look at the running backs that Penn State has. I know we joke all the time about, Penn State and their track record against Ohio State, but if we're talking football, X's and O's, we're not talking about James Franklin and his track record. If I told you Ohio State lost November 1st to Penn State because they were just running all over them, and by the time of the fourth quarter game, it's a tie game, and Ohio State just can't get a stop against these running backs because Caden McDonald and Eddrick Houston are gassed, it wouldn't surprise you. Texas, it wouldn't surprise you. So, yeah, I'm kind of worried that might cost Ohio State at least one game at some point.
I'm glad you brought up that Michigan game because that's what happened. Ohio State's offense couldn't get its act together. They kept asking its defense to make play after play after play. And eventually they ran out of gas, and Khalil Mullins ran for 27 yards up the middle because somebody missed the tackle in the hole. And that happened a few times last year where somebody missed a tackle in the hole, which is why I put on here, do we think it cost OSU something? Because up until the Michigan game, somebody missing a tackle in the hole didn't cost Ohio State anything. Ohio State against Oregon the first time, that was just a bad all-around performance by the defense. The game plan was bad. The execution was bad. That didn't come down to, here's this one thing that Ohio State keeps doing, but it hasn't really hurt them yet. And now it finally hurts them. And the one moment where you absolutely need it to not hurt you, that's what we're talking about here. Ty Hamilton's snap count by game last year: 35, 27, 34, 24, 30. And now this is where it gets real because this is Oregon and on. 51, 60, 49. Bring him back down for Purdue and Northwestern, 28 and 36. And then Indiana on 42, 53, 42, 54, 57, 47. And I'm going to tell you right now, these guys were not fully healthy by the time they got to the national championship game. It just didn't matter because it's like, dude, this is it. Give it all you got. Here's Tyleik. And he obviously missed some games in there. Akron 40, Western Michigan 30, Iowa 29, Oregon 54, Nebraska 61, Penn State 42. They didn't bring him down for Northwestern. It's because he didn't play against Purdue. 40 against Northwestern, 47 Indiana, 53 against Michigan, 44 against Tennessee, 49 against Oregon, 49 against Texas, 48 against Notre Dame. Here's what the secondary guys here, and this is where Caden McDonald and on goes. And he played every game. 17, 14, 22, 18, 5, 12, 10, 10, 21, 21, 18, 13, 10. And then they didn't really play them once they got on both sides. 9, 7, and 9 against Oregon, Texas, and Notre Dame. And I think some of that is because of the type of teams they were playing. You didn't really need Caden. You needed more of a 3-tech in there. Eddrick Houston from Purdue on when he's playing defensive tackle, because obviously the first few games there he's playing edge. 27, 16, 10, only 2 snaps against Michigan, 16 against Tennessee, 14 against Oregon, 14 against Texas, 11 against Notre Dame. I am not worried about the 54 snaps, the 57 snaps, the 53 snaps Eddrick Houston and Caden McDonald are going to play. That's not what I'm worried about. I'm worried about the 11, 14, 14, and 16, the 21, 21, 18. I'm worried about those snaps that Jason Moore and Tywan Malone and Will Smith Jr. Because what if you give up an explosive play? Because Eddrick Houston and Caden McDonald have played 4 straight series, and they are gassed, and they need a breather. And then the dam breaks, and that's when an explosive play happens up the middle because Ohio State can't stop the run. I am thinking about the Marshall game last year, but Arch Manning, Drew Aller are the quarterbacks. Illinois' quarterback, Dante Moore, Cade Klubnik. I'm worried about that more than I am about the other two, which is why I am at a 9. And it's because if Caden McDonald and Eddrick Houston get gassed because they had to play 60 snaps because you don't trust your backups, and they have to do that every single game, you are officially in a situation where you are a bad drive away from giving up a bad play. Or what if one of them gets hurt? Then what?
Yeah. It's a scary spot to be, especially with the schedule. I think the closer we get to the season starting, I think you and I are both kind of in sync of like, hey, I understand where the Arch Manning hype is coming from, but let's see it first. Yeah. He's a scary matchup if this defensive tackle depth is not great.
Because he can run.
Like, he's a scary matchup for Ohio State.
Yeah. Dual threat quarterbacks, defensive tackles who can't stop the run is scary. And it does make me wonder, and we'll get into this later in the week. So far, it's just been me and Stefan, Oren Potter, me and Andrew. I think what we're going to do for cornerback and safety is have all 3 of us on, because I do think there's a lot of moving parts to that. I do wonder what they're going to do with Caleb Downs, your problem solver, your savior of the defense. How do they
line him up at defensive tackle?
I mean, hey, man, why not? But I just mean more, how often is he just in the middle of the field patrolling? Sonny Styles and Arvell Reese, they're pretty secure tacklers, right? Peyton Pierce, a pretty secure tackler. Is Malik Hartford and Jalen McClain, are they secure tacklers? But it's your job is to maximize your strength and minimize your deficiencies. So if you're worried about your defensive tackle depth, how do they offset that with what they do in the back end? Especially with Caleb Downs, where you can essentially just put him out there and say, hey, Caleb, your job is to be the security blanket for everybody. I don't hate that idea. But it's just, what are you doing to make up for the fact that outside of your top 2, you have a lot of concerns about what's behind them, and it just wasn't there. Like, I understand there's an idea of like, how come you didn't fix it in the portal? There has to be something in the portal to fix it with, and there just wasn't anything to fix it with. But also, could we see Caden Curry inside more? Could we see Bo Atkinson? That's why I keep calling Bo Atkinson a large human being. Do we see Bo Atkinson move inside some? Do we see Kenyatta Jackson move inside some? How do they offset the fact that right now, I don't think there's a lot of confidence in the depth behind the defensive tackle. And I do think fall camp, those 30 days of practice need to be spent building some confidence. I would love it if we got to week 1 and we're going, hey, Ryan, what's your confidence level in your defensive tackles? And he's singing a much different tune than what he was singing after the spring game. Because it's there. Like, somebody said this to me in the program. If Jason Moore and Tywan Malone and Will Smith Jr. were in the portal right now, would you go get them? Probably. 100%.
Yeah.
Okay, the guys you would go get are already here. They need to start developing into something. And I'm wondering how much Matt Patricia has got involved in making sure that those guys develop into anything. Anything else defensive tackle related?
No. Got questions. I hope they get answered. I would love to know, Ryan Day, on a scale of 0 to 10, how concerned are you about your defense?
I'm just going to ask him that straight up. 0 to 10, Ryan.
I think if you asked him, like, receivers, how concerned are you? He'd be like, 10. I'd be like, all right, coach is just worrying all the time.
Yeah, no. Yeah, he's like, it was kind of the jail. I'm the paranoid guy. Okay, let's take our last break. I want to have a short conversation about Larry Johnson, but then Stefan hinted at it earlier, just kind of comparing this 2025 group to last year's group in terms of how much the reliance should be on them versus maybe other defensive positions here on Buckeye Talk.
I think you're on mute.
Workday starting to sound the same.
I think you're on mute.
Find something that sounds better for your career on LinkedIn. With LinkedIn Job Collections, you can browse curated collections by relevant industries and benefits, like flex PTO or hybrid workplaces, so you can find the right job for you. Get started at linkedin.com/jobs. Finding where you fit. LinkedIn knows how.
Who says you can't be the topic of conversation for all the right reasons? The Hyundai Tucson Hybrid pairs bold presence with advanced technology and sleek style. It's everything you didn't know you needed in an SUV and then some. Okay, Hyundai. Visit HyundaiUSA.com to learn more.
And we're back here on Buckeye Talk. Stephen Means and Stefan Krajisnik with our State of the Room series. We're talking defensive line with Larry Johnson today. Let's mark it down. Larry Johnson has been coaching for a long, long time. He's been here since 2014. So 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25. This is his 12th year at Ohio State and his 70 millionth year coaching college football. How many more years is Larry Johnson here?
I'll mark down as a guess 2 more seasons. I'll say 2026 is his final season. He goes out with Eddrick Houston.
I probably would have set the line at 1.5. But if they win a natty, I'm adding 2 more years on it. Because apparently natties don't mean you ride off into the sunset. They mean, now I'm ready to do this again. Yeah, I think I'll say 2. I'll go over. Do we actually think Ohio State's going to do more than just run a 4 down front this year?
I think so. I think they're going to get more multiple. I think they're going to have to, frankly.
Okay, well, that's the question. Is it?
We talk a lot about Eddrick or CJ Hicks is kind of this, X factor key to maybe getting multiple. Eddrick Houston unlocks some things with you too there.
Yeah.
Because of his ability to play defensive end.
You can 3 down front it, and he's like the inside outside guy, and you have like a true nose. Yeah. So I guess that's it. You're saying they're going to have to. Is it multiple out of a place of strength or out of a place of weakness then?
I think out of strength.
Okay.
Because I think along with CJ Hicks, I think not to keep, driving the bus for Arvell Reese, but I think I think CJ Hicks is less of a hybrid. He's more of like hey, we're trying to make him more of a decent defensive end. I think Arvell is kind of your peak, hybrid. He genuinely can do both.
He's a legit outside linebacker.
Right.
Go get the guy with the ball. Right. I can't wait till we talk about linebackers because I've been thinking about Peyton Pierce. And if Peyton Pierce is coming along nicely, it does open up Arvell Reese to do some of that stuff a little bit more. I think they spent 4 years recruiting to be multiple, and now they're actually here. The only problem is Jim Knowles is not here to run the defense anymore, which is why Ryan Day went out and got a guy who has run some multiple defenses out there, because now it doesn't feel like you're starting from scratch. You're starting with the roster you already have and asking a guy to drive a car he already owns, essentially. 100% of the national championship pie. How much of that percentage of the pie would you give to Jack, JT, Ty, and Tyleek turned into Monstars for 4 weeks last year?
Man, pretty good percent. Almost 50. I give half the credit just what the defensive line did.
I thought I was gonna be high on that. Yeah, because they started throwing the ball, but I don't know what the heck happened. But those 4 did something for 4 straight games that they had not done for 4 straight games their entire career. They had all flashed it in moments, but to put that together for 4 straight games against 4 really good teams who had really good offensive lines. I know Notre Dame is a little banged up and they were just getting healthy and but still, they put the fear of God in the Nico Iamaleava. Dylan Gabriel could not do anything for 3 quarters. Quinn Ewers actually had some pretty good throws, but my Lord. And even and Notre Dame's quarterback, whose name is escaping me, Riley Leonard, he was probably the worst passer of those 4. But still, it was kind of hey, we're going to run QB power for 9 minutes to open this game, and then we're kind of done. We're out of bullets, and we already threw our gun in our holster at you. Please don't sack my quarterback. So we're saying 40 to 50% of the reason why Ohio State did what it did is because its defensive line came up. What percentage of Ohio State's 2024 defensive line does Ohio State's 2025 defensive line need to be? Well, you still realistically think they can win a national title? What's the least number that it can be?
Yeah, I will say too, we say 50% on the D-line. I genuinely think what the D-line did opened up so many things with Caleb Downs and Lathan Ransom. Right. And when that 4-man rush was doing what it could do, it unlocks a lot of things for you. We saw Cody Simon unleashed a good amount in that playoff game against Oregon. But outside of that, second half of the regular season, we had to see Cody Simon and Sonny Styles get pretty involved in the pass rush. It didn't feel like they had to be involved at all the way those 4 guys started playing in the playoffs. So So ask me the question again. How good, like, compared to that group, do they need to be?
Yeah, if like they are exactly like 2024. Say, okay, well, they're just as good as the 2024 group.
Mhm.
I don't think we think that's going to happen,
Right.
but what percentage? Like, what's the lowest percentage of 2024 can this 2025 group be, and you still think Ohio State can win a national title?
Probably like 75%. Because I think they will be more multiple. I think they could change some things up. I struggle to say anything lower than that, though, because it's like, I still think, regardless of how much you move pieces around and things of that nature, you need a really good defensive line to win a college football national title, especially when you look at some of the offensive lines that are going to be in the playoff and that are already on Ohio State's schedule. So it's like, as much as I could talk about Arvell Reese and CJ Hicks and the different things that you could do with them, I think Caden, Eddrick, and Kenyatta have to be pretty good compared to, last year's group. So 75%, I'd maybe even go a little bit higher, maybe like 80.
So I think what happened last year is Ohio State's offense put pressure on other offenses to score because they came out swinging. And then the defensive line was able to let their hair back and just kind of get after the passer. But they still have to get home, because if they don't get home, it's just a shootout every single game. That's how they're created. And I think I agree 75 or higher, because if not, then Ohio State's just going to be in a bunch of shootouts. And then you're putting pressure on first-year starting quarterback to continue to complete passes, continue to make plays. I mean, essentially, you get what C.J. Stroud had to do in 2021. Because it's like, okay, we scored, but the defense didn't get a stop. So now we have to go score again. Okay, we didn't score here, and our defense didn't get a stop. So now the pressure's on us to score. So it's both. It's 50% defensive line for me last year. While I genuinely think the other 50% was simply because Ohio State decided they were just going to push the ball down the field and make you guard the playmakers, and nobody had an answer for it. I think if they are 60% of what 2024's defensive line was, I think they can get to the semifinal. Because I think they are talented enough to get to a semifinal this year. But the other three teams who will be in the semifinal are talented enough to be in the semifinal as well, especially since we're doing straight seeding this year and not that weird thing we did last year. Mm-hmm. And I think what you don't want is Oregon game the first time around, where eventually it catches up with you that you're not getting pressure and you're playing a pretty decent quarterback who, if you give him time and you give him a clean pocket, he can make some plays, even if he's never made those plays before. So I'm with 75, and I might even be like 85%. The defensive line is going to have a game in the playoff where they terrorize a quarterback. And if they can't do that at least once, Ohio State's not repeating as national champions. I don't care how good your offense is and how good these receivers are. If you don't have a game where your defensive line does what it did to Indiana, what it did to Tennessee, what it did to Oregon, they don't have to do that every game, but they have to have at least one or two games like that this year. Or they're going to probably max out at the Final Four. We're going to call it a good year, but they didn't win a natty.
We watched a little bit of the Tennessee game recently. I actually think Nico played pretty well in that game, considering
he didn't play bad. Yeah,
he was in hell, man.
Yeah, it's like, what do you want me to do? There's a defensive lineman in my face every 2 seconds.
Yeah.
Okay, that's all I got. I think I have optimistic questions on the edge, and I have concerning questions on the interior. And a little more than 30 days before Ohio State plays the top 5 matchup.
I think what's so interesting about defensive line is, if we were to, maybe we should have done this with all the positions of talking about like floor and ceiling. I genuinely think you could make the case for probably not highest ceiling, because that probably goes to receiver room, but like the defensive line probably has the biggest like gap between the floor and the ceiling of all the position groups. Because and we'll get to safety later this week, but it's like, regardless of who the number 2 next to Caleb Downs is, the floor can only be so low when Caleb Downs is out there. Whereas defensive line, like, I don't know if there's a world where it really like bottoms out and we're talking about like one of the worst defensive lines in the Big Ten. But if it's an average defensive line and you got basically a freshman quarterback on the other side who needs to carry you a bit, it can get scary.
It's the group their floor can actually cost Ohio State something. Because even with the quarterback, there's an inherent floor here. Like, the floor is Kyle McCord, whose only loss was to the national champs.
Right.
So it's the one group where if they are as bad as you fear they could be in terms of depth and maybe some guys not taking a step, Ohio State isn't going to accomplish any of its goals this year. But at the same time, I think you're right. If they're better, if they're as good as they possibly could be, I don't know, maybe Ohio State repeats. Get the text 614-350-3315. It's a 2-week free trial, $3.99 after this. Let us know how you're feeling about the defensive line. Let us know your concern level, 0 to 10, with Ohio State's defensive tackle depth as it heads into the 2025 season. We're creeping closer and closer to fall camp starting. at the end of this month. 614-350-3315. It's a 2-week free trial, $3.99 after that. For Stefan Krajisnik, I'm Stephen Means, and that was Buckeye Talk.